pictures of the great Anglo-American move into North Africa have now come in. But first, a few indications of the immense task involved in the operations. This film shows a mere fraction of the mass of machines that had to be transported, vehicles, guns, and tanks which had to be secretly concentrated and taken to the places of embarkation. Talk about staff work, this certainly was a job. Remember, the opening phase involved over 500 ships. The organization that filled those ships with their cargoes of military equipment of every kind and with their complement of fighting men, American and British, deserves the highest possible praise. Naturally enough, most of us tend to concentrate our attention on the fighting men and the battle itself. But let's pay tribute here and now to the men who worked out the details of what so far is the greatest amphibious operation in history. This time, the force was neither too little or too late. It's worth noting, too, that the secret was well kept, in spite of the enormous preparations which had to be made and the great size of the convoys to be moved. These are new shots of part of the Great Armada on its way over. We're told that the enemy never imagined we had the shipping to do it. So much the better. Anyway, the fact that we had it is now obvious. Newsreel pictures, which have been described as the most vivid and authentic of all documents, give us a pretty good idea of our ability to transport armies across hundreds of miles of sea. Hundreds of miles across the sea, and a sea infested by U-boat and mine, besides which attack by surface warships couldn't be ruled out even in the Italian lake. Therefore, our convoys were heavily escorted, and once again, perfect cooperation existed between Britain and the United States. And what a job the sailors of our two countries made of it. Big ships of the Royal Navy were present in considerable strength in case Axis warships might seize the opportunity of trying conclusions. The Fleet Air Arm, as usual, was right on the spot, and aircraft carriers were responsible to a high degree for the safe passage of so many deeply laden vessels. Reconnaissance and U-boat spotting were only two of the jobs, and we've already heard of some of the brilliant successes scored against the Axis concentrations of submarines. Enemy attack from the air, too, had to be prevented or beaten off, and the result, the safe landing of the army, speaks for itself. At the end of the voyage, final instructions were given, final inspections made. Result, not a hitch anywhere. Many beaches selected for the landings ranged from the western corner of Morocco to places hundreds of miles east, beyond the Straits of Gibraltar, beyond Algiers. Many landings were actually or almost entirely unopposed, though here and there snipers were more than a nuisance and had to be dealt with, or if possible, rounded up. At Casablanca, fighting had been in progress for some hours. Fire and smoke mark the scenes of action, both at Fort Blondin and at Casablanca. There was heavy shelling from the sea, and American planes had to bomb the French battleship Jean Bart. Shipping and buildings naturally suffered. But the local gentry remained quite calm in most cases, going about their business just as if nothing were happening. There were regrettable casualties, of course, before the resistance of misguided French soldiers and sailors was completely overcome. Isolated scenes of surrender like this were common, but friendly relations were fairly soon established between American leaders and the French high-ups. At Fedala, a most interesting capture was made, a number of German officers, members of some armistice commission apparently. Enough proof, anyway, surely, of the absolute necessity of forestalling Hitler in North Africa. As they exercised on the beach, guarded by doughboys, the Germans kept themselves in training for the last lap. Algiers and Oran surrendered more readily than Casablanca. This is Algiers, and it's easy to see that by this time everything was going along just like clockwork. As a matter of fact, the whole great show went like magic, and General Eisenhower himself has attributed much of the success to the assistance given by Britain's combined operations, both in the preparatory and in the assault stages. Lessons of commando raids had been fully absorbed, and the training and planning by our combined operations was great work. Of course, all this was only the first phase of the North African show, though in many ways the most critical phase. For Britain and America are now thoroughly establishing themselves there in strength. While the First Army and the Eighth Army get on with the job in Tunisia and Libya, the Moroccan and Algerian bases are being consolidated, all along the southern shores of the Western Mediterranean, in fact. General Nogues, formerly CNC, French North Africa, and General Join, on the right, lately commanding Algeria. Things were settling down well, and more American troops were going to town. Everywhere, the ordinary citizen, whether French, Moroccan, or Algerian, gave the Anglo-American arrivals a really hearty welcome. It's hardly surprising that they should be glad to have their liberty assured. On the other hand, a couple of hundred Italians who came here as an armistice commission in 1940 drew boos and hisses, catcalls and raspberries from the crowd as they were being taken away for internment. That wasn't surprising either.